Welcome cultists to a new series of videos using this Eldar Farseer. Eldar are actually my favourite 40k race, so I'm really happy to be finally bringing some to the channel. It's a shame they don't get more love. Hopefully they get some new miniatures or they get a total redo in the future, and I'd love to do more tutorials on them. I think I'll probably do another tutorial with some Eldar at some point, one of the Banshees, anything new, because they're just so great to paint. I actually chose this specifically to talk about some subjects. I looked at some of the comments that you guys wanted to see tutorials on, and OSL came up a few times, and also true metallic metals. So the main thing for this piece is going to be the OSL. Hopefully from the photo you get this sense of light, an aura of blue that's coming across the whole miniature. So that's the main thing I wanted to get across in this tutorial. It's going to be quite bite-sized, and that's something else I'm trying new, so I'm looking forward to seeing how you find that. And hopefully it makes the videos just a little easier to digest, and it'll be broken into little subjects. So the true metallic metals will get its own video, the robes will get its own video, and so on. This first video, we're really going to focus on the head, obviously the focal point of any miniature, and we're going to paint the sword too. And the sword is obviously what's creating the OSL, creating the blue aura. So we're going to get that done first, and then we'll break down each of the elements and kind of work out how the blue light from the sword will affect each of those. I feel like OSL is a misunderstood technique, and I think we often associate it with maybe some quick airbrushing of some bright white that covers the whole model, and it can be very overpowering. But OSL, or object source lighting, can just mean that an object pushes out some light and it affects the colours around it. And that can be really subtle. It doesn't actually have to be super powerful. All it means is that it's changing the tones. And that's what I'm trying to do with this. It's not super subtle. You can tell that everything's kind of blue, but hopefully you can see it's not completely overpowering. What I was trying to do was create a kind of atmosphere, and it just so happens that blue creates this kind of cold, nice, dark, grim atmosphere as a nice byproduct. And it goes really well with the other colours I've chosen, with the purple and the black. I think this will be the first in a series of OSL tutorials because it's a really interesting subject. It's something I'm enjoying incorporating in my miniatures more. Another term I would use for it would be environmental light. OSL is specifically talking obviously about an object. In this case, the sword is changing the light of the figure. But I think it's also worth talking about atmospheric lights. So there could be things like the basing elements change the colours. Just talking about how other objects or light sources around can affect the look of the miniature. And it can have such a big impact on your figures. And I think it's enjoyable and fun to paint. And it's quite fun to work out as well, trying to work out, okay, how will this colour affect that? So I think with that long intro, we will dive into it. It's funny actually, because normally I pick a miniature I really want to paint, and normally it's something like a new release, as you know, like Sigvold, and I'll base the tutorials on that. With this one, I was kind of reading through the comments and thinking, okay, what do people want to see, and what do I think is going to be the most interesting? And like I said, OSL was the subject that I think stood out to me. So I was kind of like, what miniature am I going to do this on? And I had this Eldar Farseer that I built a horrendous long time ago. I don't know, it was a couple years. I'll look back on the photos. So yeah, I prepped it a couple years back and just never got around to it. But it was quite nice because it was ready to go, which obviously saved me a lot of time, and I could get straight into recording the tutorials. But actually now I'm kind of almost finished it. It was the perfect subject. It's quite a small miniature, so it doesn't take a long time to paint, and I think that's probably the way forward. for tutorials coming up, because it means I can talk about a specific subject, teach you things, but it won't take me forever to do. Something like Sigvold, we're explaining non-metallic metal, but just me getting that non-metallic metal done is a really hard and big time investment. So I think I'll mix it up and paint some small miniatures like this. I actually really enjoyed painting just a straight up 28mm character. It was really nice, and I just went together quickly and I enjoyed every minute of it. I prepared it so long ago that I have these photos of it all together, but I'd actually had it on separate corks ages ago. So these are the shots I have of it all together. The parts are the Farseer, obviously, is the model, but then I've switched it out with the regular Farseer head with his chin removed. And then we have the cat from the Triumvirate set. I can't remember the name of her. Is it Yvrain or something? Nobody knows how to say those. And then the base is made up of Eldrad's pieces separated out. And you have just some little bits of cork and wood and things like that. So if you wanted to, I think it would be quite easy to replicate this exactly. It's not a crazy conversion. It's just quite an extensive part list, as there's 4 kits here. But you could slim that right down, I think. And obviously just use the Farseer head. But I love the cat. I think that's a great addition, and I can't wait to paint it. So I've broken it down into 4 parts. We've got the little cat separate on a cork, and I have the base, obviously, which we'll do later. And you can see how the parts from Eldrad are separated there. And I like how that kind of curved part matches the edge of the plinth. And some just bits of cork stuck to the side, little roots to make it seem like a woodland forest, and I quite like how it overhangs the edge there. And then there's some putty just to make sure I can get the miniature in the right place. I love how the cat matches the curve of that rock, and it's going to obviously come around the side of the Farseer. I've got the head and the body separate, and we'll spray with the head on with blue tack, but I really want to paint the head separately. It's really important we consider how the OSL is going to affect the head, because I do want to paint it on a separate cork, but we've just got to make sure we've got that angle correct and we know where the highlights are going to hit the top of it. Obviously, if you get it slightly off, you can just turn the head. So we're going to begin with the sword now. I recommend you watch our video on painting power swords. I didn't think it was worth me going super in depth on this part, because you can just watch that video, and it's really in depth talking about the layering and the glazing. But we're starting out with a base coat of AK blue-green, and I actually used a little bit of grey in there, but I regret that, and I would recommend using Despair Green for a slightly more vibrant look. What's most important, I think, on swords is that we separate the different angles of the blade. And for me, that's more important than having lots of different transitions going light to dark, light to dark. So you can see I just separate that flat part and the edges here. Then nice and simple in terms of recipe, I just added ivory into the blue-green. And that's so we don't get a really, really vibrant blue. Just adding a white or an off-white will slightly desaturate the colour. And I have a bright light at the top, and then I'm going to put a little one at the bottom here. Then I just keep adding in more ivory, and I'm going to build a really bright highlight on that edge part there. Like I said, I definitely recommend checking our power sword video, as it's really in depth, and it'll help you with this part immensely. And then I can just catch the edge there with the same colour, and you can use the side of the brush just to get really crisp edges really fast. Then I use almost pure ivory. You could use pure ivory, just depends how much contrast you like. But you can see I try and follow that curve. And then we'll use glazes. Here I'm using a mix with grey, which like I said I regretted. And this is how I painted the sword at this point. Later I changed it, as you'll see, to have just more interest going on and some more saturated colours. But if you use a despair green, honestly, it will look way better. So I'm looking at the miniature here and thinking about where will the sword affect. It'll be this upper chest area and around the head. And I'm just looking at the helmet before I remove it and separate it, thinking about, where the highlights are going to be. So the main highlight is going to be on this one side of the helmet, and you can kind of tell the shape that it's going to be based on how the light's bouncing off that black. Now with the helmet separate, we'll begin the first highlight. So I've taken this grey from AK and I've just added a little bit of the blue-green from AK as well. So it's the same colour I used for the sword, and we're going to begin with a very broad highlight. So this is going to be the primary highlight, which is obviously affected by the OSL, and it's going to be very bright, and we're going to incorporate the OSL. You can see where the natural light is hitting off the black, and I can actually follow that pretty well. The only difference is I'm going to probably end up painting it a little bit broader to give me more leeway for glazing and building up some highlights later on. So you can see I made it a little broader and I started picking out some of the edges too, and this is with the same colour. And I do a little volume highlight running down the face. At this point, make all your highlights too broad because you'll probably run out of room. It's a mistake I make all the time, is just start off with it too narrow and then we run out of room for the layers after. Once we've got that shape right, it's quite simple, as we just add in a little bit more of the blue-green and a little bit of white. So what you're always doing is making it brighter, and you're trying to control how blue it is. So by mixing in some of the blue-green and the white and try and find that balance. So you're looking for a turquoise tint where the sword is hitting the black helmet, but you don't want it to be too much of an overpowering turquoise. And here just adding in some more white, and again painting a nice, very controlled shape, a little bit smaller each time. And this side is the main highlight, so it's going to be very bright, but we'll probably paint a secondary highlight on the other side of the helmet that won't be as bright, and it won't have the blue tint to it as it's hidden from the sword. And you can see I'm just hitting up those edges, but only the ones that face upwards get this brighter tone. And it's quite hard to work around those details. Just try to ignore them and make sure you get the highlight right up to them. I match up this highlight on the shoulder pad at the same time too. The sleeve elements are a different material. The final highlight is going to be something like the grey, a little bit of the turquoise, and almost pure white. So we're not going to go all the way to pure white, just keep adding it until you feel you have a bright enough highlight. Once you're happy with the layering and you've got the highlights bright enough, we can tidy it up with glazes of pure black just to blur that edge. I'm not looking for it to be perfect, but I just want to soften it, so we're always brushing towards the black there. And that will just blend that edge in quite nicely. Repeat this until you're happy with the transition. And of course we come to the other side and push that away there. And that's the final effect. You can see I've blocked in the symbol in Rhinox hide and it already looks tons better. It can look really messy when you kind of got the paint everywhere. But this is the main highlight done now. And what we'll do is we'll work on having a secondary highlight on the other side. This is going to be softer. So when I say softer, I mean not as bright. And it's also going to be in neutral tones. So we're going to take the same grey that we added the blue to, and obviously we're not going to add the blue to it. And this volume will be a little bit smaller because we're not going to go quite as bright. And again, we're just following where we can see the light hitting that grey. So you can make a slightly lighter grey than this, maybe by just adding a tiny bit of white, and just work your way around, building up a nice soft grey highlight transition. Picking out all the edges, as well as painting all those volumetric highlights. Once you're happy with the highlights, you can do the same process and soften it with the glazes of black. I actually did quite a big highlight in the end, so I'll end up doing more glazing. But the main principle is that you paint it in the neutral tone, so without the turquoise OSL, and that it's not as bright so it doesn't detract from it. But it's important we have this secondary light to provide interest and to help it seem like a shiny kind of metallic black surface. It will also add to the OSL effect because it will seem more blue on the other side by comparison with the neutral tones. There you can see how different it is with the neutral grey on one side and then the powerful blue on the other. And you can finish by just picking out again some of the top edges. So don't edge highlight everything, just the parts facing upwards. Painting edge highlights with this direction in mind will help to sell your effect even more. I continued to add slightly brighter highlights on the volumes too, just in small amounts, until I was happy with the contrast. I'm going to paint a lightning effect now, coming up the back here. I don't know what it's called, the fin, horn. And I start with a glaze of Despair Green. This isn't necessary, to be honest, but I knew I was going to glaze in the end anyway, so it's kind of tinting the whole black area with this very dark green. Despair Green is very translucent, so it really doesn't do much over black. So what I did is came back to it with a little bit of blue-green added to it, and that gave it some body and it had a little bit of coverage. So now we're going to begin blocking in the lightning. I'm going to have it denser and brighter towards the gem, so the space between each line is going to be larger as we go towards the top. I would start this first line quite chunky, especially at the bottom, but have it quite thin at the top, and that means you're going to be able to fit brighter lines in later, nearer down. So have a quick practice with this, but don't worry too much. If you use diluted paint, you can erase everything with black, but it is quite hard. You just need to experiment and practice with these sorts of things. Just try and make a nice random pattern with good sections between each lightning. And we can paint a nice chunky line around the gem, as that's going to be quite bright by the end of it. So now it's a case of just mixing up brighter blues and painting smaller areas. So I'm going to paint the gem first, paint a nice bright highlight towards the top, and then a secondary one on the bottom. And then we'll just use that same tone for the lightning parts too. So I begin with the aura around the gem with a very chunky line, and then from that we'll try to paint some nice thin lines going over the previous ones. You can actually see that first step was probably too diluted, a little bit dark because it didn't really do anything, so this could actually be your first stage. I will admit, I found this very hard to do accurate lines with filming, so I've kind of painted here to demonstrate, but then I had to redo it. Now you can see what I meant. We have the skinniest lines we can do at the top, and they're a little bit chunkier near the gem, so we can paint some brighter lines in between. So again, we paint the gem first of all. Nice bright highlight moving the brush towards the top. And then we add a little bit of ivory and we can paint the lightning. I think I missed a clip there, but you just need to paint the lightning with this white tone, as thin as you can really. Once you're happy with that, you can use glazes of really dilute despair green, and that can blur and blend everything together really nicely, because you can see the white lightning just doesn't transition nicely into the one above. So I'll just soften everything with despair green. And despair green is so good for glazing. It's really translucent, so it's easy to use for glazes, and the color is just wonderful. And I'll just continue that process, but now a little more focused, so not over the whole thing, just where I feel the lightning doesn't transition very well. And I can even blend the gem in together as well. Really love this paint. I recommend getting it. So that's kind of the final effect. After you've glazed, you can actually reapply the highlights and you can make them nice and bright again. But the idea is basically nice, neat lightning forks, and it transitions, getting brighter and more intense near the gem. Also paint some highlights on the back of the helmet, just like we did with the front. So you just want to incorporate that blue aura affecting all the parts around it. And you can see the other side is just exactly the same. But it's a really fun effect, and I think it's a really cool way to make this part of the helmet interesting. I especially like how the despair greens faded the lightning at the top of it. I just love that color. And then we can see how it looks with the front of the helmet too. That is the helmet completed. I hope you enjoyed this first part of the tutorial. So we have a nice introduction to OSL and a nice way to paint black too. Just thinking about how to incorporate some of those blue tones and bring it into the black. And also we went over that really cool lightning effect. So hopefully that gives you enough to practice for now. These are both quite tricky things, I think. Getting the volume highlight correct on the helmet and the right amount of blue is the challenge. And then with the lightning, I think painting those really accurate, neat, tidy lines is tricky. But you can use your glazes to soften and adjust all those things. So I think they're really useful tools. Throughout the rest of the stages, we're going to go over the different colors and basically work out how they're affected by this blue aura coming from the sword. So in the next part, we're going to do metallics, and we're going to use true metallic metals and try and come up with a way that we can incorporate these colors, but still keeping it metallic looking. So I'll see you in that second part coming soon.